quick talk for someone that's so short.
Vale, ahí sale.
Well, yeah.
Ah, vale, síguela,
Am
síguela.
I meant to be here? Okay, I'm going to go here. So I'm going to welcome on stage straight away the first speaker, which is Kaur. I'm really excited we've got 5 speakers on this panel, all of whom I think are sort of pioneering, showing us, really demonstrating and doing the hard work and showing us what is possible in place if you're trying to reimagine and rebuild from the neighbourhood up. So, Imi.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel a bit nervous because I think it's a bit bizarre really to be coming from the UK, particularly England, and sharing messages of hope right now, and to very much say that there is lots of them and this panel is going to be full of that, but also to say that it's a real honour to be here with you all and really looking forward to learning so much from what's happening in this incredible city. And this morning I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the work that we're doing in Birmingham in the UK. And so I'm going to land you in the first part of this talk is just to get you to imagine what we're up to. And then I'm going to go into a little bit about why I think this is so important and a practical example of what I mean before we're joined by an incredible panel of people developing their neighbourhoods in imaginative, creative and really transformative ways. So we're based in an inner city neighbourhood in Birmingham called Neighbourhood. This is a derelict site, an old industrial site that is a picture of the 20th century extractive economics that meant that countries like England and the UK thrived through what was called an industrial revolution, whilst often extracting and exploiting many across the world. And it's a story that for us was a progressive one of incredible wealth and progress, and at the expense of much of what you would already know. And we're based here and we are looking to reimagine this into civic infrastructure, a public square, one that you will know really well, that enables, empowers, provides skills, agency and a platform for communities and neighbourhoods to be at the forefront of their climate transition. And over the last 10 years, we have been building on this idea that communities, wherever they are, sorry, that time is very different to what I thought I had. Okay.
I didn't say it.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more quickly. I was trying to be slow because I know the translation needs to catch up. But we, for the last 10 years, have been building spaces and nurturing and convening communities that are focused on what it means for people to be at the forefront of tackling systemic challenges. Not just putting communities and neighbours in shoveling the snow or picking up litter, both very noble, important acts, which I recommend us all to continue to do. But know that actually the answer to some of our most complex questions lies at the heart of our homes, streets and neighbourhoods, in the communities where people are most proximate to the challenges that they face. And not to put that scale of change of neighbourhoods and streets in conflict with the city or in conflict with the nation when it comes to this huge climate transition, but to say it's a crucial part. And so I'm just going to actually now, because that's a lot less time than I thought I had, and then flick you through some of these pictures to show you what we have been doing. In Birmingham, we have been reimagining our economic possibility, thinking about how we can start to think about goals beyond GDP and endless growth, and using the model of daily economics from Cape Rayward in school playgrounds, on street corners, in front gardens, in places where actually often communities are left to have sort of charitable aid or to have one-off programs that aren't believed to be at the heart of reimagining and building this new economy. Through growing, through play, through many, many different stories, we have been creating everyday movements and participation to transform that site into an example, into a demonstrator of what it means to have the sort of infrastructure that will help communities to be and and neighbourhoods to be at the forefront of their climate transition. And because I would have talked you through a lot more of that, I'm just going to quickly share why I think this is so important. So, yes, it's really important for us to put mobility and dignity at the heart of our places. Yes, it's important that we believe that our communities, our neighbourhoods, our spaces that we convene in can do far more than just wait for a government or for a city to say, this is now how we're going to transition through this incredible crisis. But this isn't just a nice idea that we've come across. Ed set out really clearly the scale of challenges we're all facing. And we know from COVID that actually some of the most, the beginnings of the anti-fragility and resilience that we all started to experience happened, particularly in England, happened when streets were setting up their WhatsApp groups, where people were using their kitchens for mutual aid and for sharing. We know that much of what global, the national government could have reached that final mile, and you started to see these thick, rich networks showing what could be possible in the COVID-19 pandemic. And I believe that this is actually really fundamental to how we are going to transition in a time of ecological and social and climate emergency, where we are dysregulating the planet to an extent where we cannot quite predict how bad things are going to get and hitting us quickly. Therefore, there is no predictable model of how we can do this. And in other times in society where there is not an A, B, C answer of how we get through, and some prime minister at the heart of a nation can say, right, this is what we're all gonna do, and it's gonna be fine. A good example of this in the UK, excuse the poor example of not giving much details on the war, is in post-war in the UK. The UK was bankrupt, we were ill, we were sick, we needed to rebuild our economy, albeit to some pretty old and industrial goals. But we understood that at the heart of that there were some systemic large-scale transformations we needed. We built something called the NHS, the National Health Service, because we understood health to be crucial to how our communities, how our country, whether you're on the positive moral side of everybody should be healthy, or whether you were more on the side of we need people to be healthy so they can go back to work and make our economy more productive. We understood that this isn't going to be someone standing behind a lectern saying, can you all just get healthy and get back to work as quickly as possible? We've got a country to build post a terrible imperial war, but let's not go into that for a second. That's not how it was going to work. So when we built the NHS, we understood we built a national system. The role of the government, the role of the nation is to invest in that, to legislate that, to create the policy, the vision, the direction. We then at regional levels created large-scale hospitals, speciality hospitals, created lots of different spaces in which we could have our children in more healthy ways, in which we could deal with challenges like cancer and sicknesses in creative and thoughtful and joined-up ways. But we understood very clearly one last mile of that, and that was the neighbourhood GP. We built democratic access to health on every street corner. We have something called the GPs in the UK. You go to them, you go and tell them what's wrong. They try, post this horrendous era we're now in, where our health service is being massively underfunded. And you have the access and the tools to start to be in that preventative space, to take control of your own health. And this was a huge transition. This is not a story of 1 or 2 years, this is 20, 30, 40, 50 years post the war. The same happened with the libraries, when we went from an industrial era to a more knowledge-based economy. We didn't just build massive libraries in the centre of the country or a city centre, we built community libraries. So when Ed talks about stories and the challenges that we are going to face, I want to set the frame for this session and say that when we talk about developing the neighbourhood, cities from the neighbourhood, if I don't just mean there is some nice things that communities can do. I don't just mean that we should accept that someone will come to us from, a national government or a city government and say, hey, we've made all the decisions, could we work with you to engage the community? What I'm saying is that we need a whole new typology and class of infrastructure. Our high streets, our public squares need to be retrofitted and created with spaces that put the tools, the ideas, the agency, the maker spaces, the sharing libraries, the access to growing the skills, the jobs into the hands of local people, not just because that's a nice thing to do, but because it will become increasingly impossible to deal with the scale of challenges that we are going to face in the next decade if we sit back and we wait for the answers to come just from large scales. And we have to take that really, really seriously. And if I had the extra 5 minutes that I thought I was going to have, I would have told you about how we are doing that. And I was going to give you an example, but I'll finish with this. I was going to give you an example of a key social challenge in the UK. Some of you will know we were just about to blow 150 billion, 150,000 million pounds, just to be really clear, of public money in the UK in order to save us from an even more horrific cost of living crisis. 150,000 million pounds of public money is about to go from the state to the privately owned energy providers in order to help our bills to be lower. 2 or 3 years ago, when certain candidates for government were saying we need less than that to retrofit and insulate our homes, to make them warmer, to make them more future-proof, you would have been called a communist, a Marxist. How dare you think that we can spend £100 billion of public money back into the hands of the people? And now we're about to have one of the biggest transfers of wealth from the public purse towards a minority of stakeholders. Now that is a new part of the story that I just wanted to add because this is happening in the UK. But I wanted to give you an example of what I meant. I don't mean that we build infrastructure in our neighbourhoods to make us all feel better, to have nice places to go and have coffee and so on and so on. That's great. All of that really matters. But that's not what I mean. I mean it's going to be physically impossible for us to transition equitably, boldly, transformatively, to build streets, neighbourhoods, cities that are not only resilient but are able to deal with the shocks that are coming without that being street by street, neighbourhood by neighbourhood, because we have to build a whole new class of deep, resilient infrastructure and access to those tools so that we, whilst we won't know the answers to everything that's coming, we quite know what's coming, we have the tools, the confidence, the thick networks, the access to knowledge, the access to skills to be able to deal with that. And this is a great example of that for us in the UK. In Birmingham, we need to retrofit 2 out of every 3 homes by 2041. Across Europe, that means we have to retrofit a home once every 20 seconds to have any chance of meeting our carbon emissions and to create healthy, society and communities that have homes, the key part of their lives, healthy enough to thrive. And there's no physical way to do this from the top down. You cannot stand behind the lectern and say this is what we need. You can't build the supply chains. You can't build the skills. You can't build the knowledge, confidence, creativity from, just from a city level, from a country level. This requires all of our makerspaces, our fab labs, our schools, our teaching infrastructures to start teaching new classes of jobs, to start thinking about what needs to be done by professionals, what needs to be DIY, to build whole new public knowledge programs, to build whole new public civic partnerships. And I would have taken you through a few examples, but I'm going to stop there to say that I'm really excited for this morning that we've curated together because there's a whole class of incredible people that you're going to hear from that are taking this idea that we need to build from our neighbourhoods up really seriously into incredible examples of it. And I'm going to be talking to Angie Tangaere now, who is an incredible leader from New Zealand, who's going to be telling us more about how she's thinking about this. Thank you very much.
You might want to sit right the other end.
Okay. I'm just going to wait here until somebody tells me what to do.
I think we're waiting for Angie to appear.
Angie should be joining us on screen in a second.
Wonderful. So whilst Angie is joining us, I will just give you a little bit of an introduction of how I met Angie. Was through a festival we ran a couple of years ago, which was about reimagining our neighbourhoods and our places. And Angie works for the Auckland Co-Design Lab, and she brings a perspective of her culture and her community as an Indigenous person living and working in. Oh, there she is on the screen. Hi, Angie. I can see you. I don't know if you can see me. Can you see me? Yeah, amazing. Oh, welcome. Well, we're going to get straight into it. And Angie's incredible bio is online, and you should read it if you want to know all of the details. But I really want you to hear her voice as much as possible, because she is, for me, one of the most profoundly inspiring practitioners, and the way in which she intersects culture and design, and the huge severance that her community has felt from its culture and land into how she rebuilds and is rethinking communities. And I'm going to say neighbourhoods, but I'm actually going to introduce Angie to say, Angie, could you tell us a little bit more about how you understand that scale of organising, one that doesn't individualise, doesn't say every household, every person has to figure out how we transition and we do this work by themselves, but isn't also saying we can just sit back and wait for a national or a city level approach to solve all these challenges for us, and to give us a bit of an introduction into your work.
Kia ora tātou katoa. He mahi nui, kia tātou hui mai nei, koe te tairi hau no te tairawhiti, ko he rara te maunga ko waiputi awa ko Ngāti Porou te iwi, te hei mauri ora. Thank you so much for that introduction, Amy, and it's so it's such a privilege to be able to share some of our learning alongside yourself and Cassie, and the dessert making iron lady. That was a wonderful conversation or a presentation to listen to. Perhaps if I just do a little bit of context setting, and then I can talk about how we're reconceptualizing infrastructure, scale, and the way that we reimagine into the future. The Auckland Co-Design Lab is an innovation and learning platform geared towards better social and economic outcomes for our families that are experiencing the most inequity in South Auckland. They're very similar issues to the issues that Ami's outlined in terms of Indigenous and refugee and migrant populations being exploited for a particular gain for other parts of our community. And what we're trying to understand are what are the compelling alternatives to the current system's responses. Basically what Imi's saying is we're trying to figure out how we reverse engineer our current policy cycles, our current thinking, our current program, intervention, crisis ideologies that are embedded in our colonial infrastructures here in Aotearoa. So that's our focus, is to understand how we demonstrate these compelling alternatives in place and what you would call community, and at the same time, how are we building the system's capability, the system's change strategies to enable those conditions in place to be supported through centralised responses. So that's our remit, is to understand what do we do differently right now, because if we keep doing the same things that we're doing here in South Auckland, for example, then the responses, particularly the government responses, local and central government, the responses that we are currently funding, reinforcing, they will increase the inequity that families are experiencing. They won't even hold it. They won't even continue to be stable. So those are the things that we're doing. One of the things that we're really focused on is how we reconnect what the reclamation of Indigenous knowledge for us here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, what that looks like, to help us navigate the complexity and these really wicked and gnarly challenges, social and economic. So that means for us, for example, we think about what what the social perspective, what the cultural perspective is on how we connect with people and what our most powerful units of connection are. And for us, the smallest social unit is what we would call the whānau, and you might think of it as the nuclear family structure, but we think of it wider than that. So that is parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles. It's an intergenerational way of thinking about how we engage with people in community based on how they see themselves through their cultural lens.
Build on that, and thank you so much for sharing around the reclamation of Indigenous knowledge and practice in the work, and as a key tenet for how you are demonstrating alternative possibilities in a time where many are completely frozen by how are we going to navigate the scale of challenges that are, like you said, social, economic, ecological, and to build on that a little bit, you talk often about indigenising the work, and we talked about infrastructure in our call previously, and at Civic Square we've been thinking about that infrastructure in both a social way, i.e. the connections, the work that happens between people, and in a physical way, the literal access to tools, to spaces, to knowledge, to an understanding of the scale of the challenge being in the hands of the people. And when you talk about this, and I particularly keep referencing the way we think about it in even our own, I sit in a space of living in the global north, but also drawing on experiences and a history myself that is not one that is Western. And so we sort of sit in this kind of confused space where we're trying to bring something better and different and connected to a neighbourhood scale. But for you, this disconnection from the culture and the land, particularly the cultural infrastructure and indigenising the work that happens, is really crucial to how you see us being able to move forward. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that cultural infrastructure and some of the impacts of that disconnection from the culture and the land for your people, and how you are thinking about some of taking that forward. In 2020, Angie wrote a piece as part of an incredible field guide, which I can share the link with you all later, which started to build out a kind of manifesto almost about how the ideas and the values from which she and others in her community have been leading the work. Angie, could you tell us a little bit more about the way in which you are using actual frameworks to really re-indigenize the work that you have been involved in and bring it into the space that you've been working in with Auckland Co-Design Lab?
Sure, and for people who are not aware of the history of Aotearoa, New Zealand, we were colonised, and there's a treaty, Te Tiriti, a treaty of Waitangi that was signed between ourselves as an Indigenous people and the Crown, and our co-design lab has a leadership model that reflects and acknowledges that partnership as people of the land and people of the treaty equally. But what that means for us as a people is that colonisation, there's an ongoing, there's continues to be an ongoing effect in terms of colonisation for the Indigenous population here. That means we're suffering significant inequity as a result, and part of our reclamation and my passion to return to Indigenous knowledge systems, not just to grapple with these incredible social, economic and ecological challenges, is that for us as a people that's important for to maintain our own well-being and to find ourselves as an Indigenous culture. What it helps us to do is Indigenous knowledge systems and Indigenous knowledge and practices helps us to start in a fundamentally different place to what our traditional systems and ideologies that are embedded in colonial systems start with. So often our traditional response is essential local government is to start with the problem, its deficit, its intervention. It's often crisis orientated. Indigenous knowledge systems help us to understand a different way of being, knowing and doing, and often values led. What that helps us to do is to start thinking differently about how we collectivise in community and in place, and how we build on the strengths of our families, of our communities, and build out what the solutions are and what the alternatives are based on those strengths, but also based on the values of our knowledge systems, which includes things like how do we care for each other, how do we create genuine and authentic relationships, how do we acknowledge those that have gone before us, and to acknowledge our responsibility to those who will come in the future. And those things help us to really start from a different place and help us to design and create solutions that are fundamentally different to what our traditional systems responses are, I guess.
In the past, you've talked very much about value system that centres care and collective organising, and you gave some, when we've chatted in the past, you've given some really interesting examples of how that supported your community and Auckland more widely, to learn about how does then a community that is indigenising it's reclaiming its Indigenous knowledge and practice into social challenges can help to reimagine alternatives and demonstrate them now. Can you tell us a little bit about some examples of how that has shown up in your work, and maybe some examples from the pandemic where you were able to think and organise differently when you reclaimed and centred that cultural culturally significant knowledge to you, and be able to bring that back? And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the challenges to that in the current system shortly, but it'd be really great to just hear what does some of that mean for you in practice in your work?
So I would see, alongside my co-director, our role is to create the space using cultural practice for families and communities to step into a space where they feel valued, they feel acknowledged, their lived experience is valued and acknowledged as a way of innovating in this space. So part of what we do is really creating the space and the processes for our families and local communities to lead the innovation in these spaces. But I can give you one example about healthy homes. Actually, I just heard you and me talking about that in a local context and then in COVID. But what we were able to do by creating a space where families who are socially isolated and experiencing significant inequity in our communities to step into a space and to lead the design, the testing and the learning around what's possible in the local alternatives here in our community, which meant that our families here in South Auckland created a prototype for warmer, healthier homes, and that prototype was based on key cultural principles, and they were: how do we care for each other, and how do we build genuine and authentic relationships with each other at a community level, family to family at a community level. And what that approach helped us to do was to create a family-to-family approach to healthier housing solutions rather than a service or a government response. And what they were able to do was to democratise some technical housing knowledge around how you can practical things that you can do to create warmer and healthy housing, and they were able to do that in a way that was more about building the connections at a community level, family to family, and more about building the social infrastructure that can support well-being and this pro-social relationships, and caring for each other, which they said was our community and our families were telling us, well, that's one of their key strengths, is that they want to care for each other. And sometimes they're not sure how to do that, or they don't have the opportunity. So the response becomes more about how we're caring for each other and how we're supporting building out of those relationships and that infrastructure for caring and genuine relationships, and the transmission of some technical knowledge that was democratized by those families about, you know, opening your windows and creating ways of getting rid of mold, and families being able to talk about their experience of testing these things in their home was much more powerful than having a service provider come in and do a whole lot of stuff. So it's more about what you're saying, Amy, about people being, they don't want to be passive recipients of service. They want to be leading their own solutions in place. It's much more empowering when you can do things for each other and for yourself than to feel like you're having to receive some kind of service.
Go on in my presentation is our experience similarly to yours. We've been working on this like street scale because there's a real practical issue in the UK around some of the big challenges that we have are being funded and incentivized from like a central government level, and money's just going back to central government because they aren't able to get the uptake, and ultimately what we find is when you ask the right questions at a street level, and in this case you've talked about values of care and wanting to care for one another, when you ask the right questions about how do we create warmer homes, healthier homes, how do you share these things more, how do you connect with one another, we start to get the beginnings of what is actually a far more effective approach as well to tackling a challenge. We have more and more where the government sort of had to, where our constituency had to send money back to government because nobody was signing up for the retrofit program. Now we have like streams and streams of people saying, I want to do this too. Here's all the layers we can look after ourselves at a mutual aid scale, at a layer of supporting one another, around having access to our own knowledge. And here's where we do need city officials, here's where we do need planning, here's where we do need the government. And so I think it's really important here to like distinguish this idea of this is not about individualizing all of these challenges back down to people to sort them out for themselves and let everybody else off the hook, but it's about starting from a point of where there's key values and context that already exists and where there is a genuine desire, but the way our current systems have been set up, there is no way to be able to, as we're going to hear shortly from Melissa and Akil, to access that land, to think about how to build those homes. And this is, again, a really incredible example of that. And Angie, I just wanted to sort of start to finish off with a kind of final question, which you still got a few minutes to reflect on. And, you know, you've talked a lot, we've talked a lot in the past about the impact of what happens when you are disconnected from your culture and your values and the impact that has had on people. And because there is a mixed audience here who will have all sorts of different versions of what it means to be detached from culture, from language, from spaces, and that help them to reimagine and imagine new futures. What would be your advice to an audience who, I would argue, and I think Cassie alongside me here has done a lot of great work in showing that when communities and groups of people are able to access and centre their knowledge systems, their languages, their imaginations, their histories and ancestors in spaces, they are able to start from very different starting points about what the future might look like, one that isn't just stuck in the tyranny of now and what our current system says we can do. So you've got some, real clear examples of the impact this has had on your people in quite traumatizing and terrifying ways. And how have you been able to transfer that into practice that is a way of lifting that up in a system that pushes it down? And what advice would you have for others who are thinking about, who aren't quite yet on that journey, about what it means to really reclaim our histories, our knowledge, our languages, our culture, and how important is that in imagining new futures?
Well, we would say it's critical. because you can't, our job is to support families and communities in place to lead the reimagining of the future. And if you can't acknowledge the trauma and the intergenerational trauma of place, then we're going to keep doing what we're doing, and we're going to keep getting what we're getting. So for us, it is firstly acknowledging the trauma of colonisation and the intergenerational inequity and pain that has caused for our Indigenous population here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And also it's about saying, this is my personal mission, is in my position and the influence that I have, is to lift up Indigenous knowledge systems as some of the most key powerful ways of learning and innovating in these amongst the complexity and with the most complex challenges that we have. But the first thing is that we have to acknowledge there's a whole heap of healing that has to happen for a lot of communities, and part of that healing is for those communities to see themselves in the spaces and the processes and innovation processes, particularly where their culture is acknowledged as the powerful innovation and learning systems that they are. And that's part of my job, is to be able to lift up these systems in quite traditional settings, and to demonstrate how powerful they are in helping us to reimagine into the future and to do things differently, to be a different way, to think a different way. So that's part of my mission. But my message would be, you must acknowledge the history and the story of place for peoples, and the intergenerational trauma that our communities that are experiencing the most inequity have experienced. And there must be a way for us to acknowledge that and also support healing even through innovation processes that, as we're discussing, and spaces that we're creating at the same time.
Such a beautiful start to the day. I'm really, really grateful for your time, especially given that it's much later for you where you are. Sending you a lot of love, and I hope if you keep watching in through the channel, there's a lot of beautiful threads that come through everyone's work. And I just want to close this little bit before passing on to Cassie by saying that what we're all facing are very similar and interconnected challenges, and there's so much we can learn from each other over these next 2 days about how we are facing the social, economic, ecological, interdependent challenges that are facing us. But one of the things that stays true is that we can't ignore the stories and the contexts of the places we're in. So to take the ideas from here, but remember that actually in our neighbourhoods, in our streets, we have histories and stories, that those ideas can join. And you're going to hear that beautifully, particularly in Melissa's talk, to do really, really bold things. And I want to just say thanks for the chance to bring Angie, because I think she's an incredible practitioner. And I really encourage everyone to look up the Auckland Co-Design Lab, particularly Angie Tangaere's field guide, where she really has created a framework for what this could look like in practice. And I think she speaks beautifully to what Ed started the day off with, around it's not just enough to love a place, you have to heal it, and to really think about what that might mean. And I'm going to stop talking now, pass over to you and for the rest of the channel. Should I just stay for the rest?
Yeah, I'd
stay here.
I'd stay here. Thanks, Imi, and thanks, Angie. Yeah. And I realised I did a real disservice to Imi at the start. I didn't really introduce her. Just like, here's Imi, and that's in part, like everyone's bios are in the programme. But I do just want to say, I can't speak highly enough of the kind of leadership that Imi brings in the UK and globally. And I think you'll see that from all of our speakers on this panel. Pay attention to all the different layers in which they're operating. Imi sort of touched on it, but this is not just neighbourhood work. They like Imi can hold a space, she can host a conversation, she's talking at a policy level, she's doing the work on the ground, she's leading a team or co-leading a team. all these people are operating so systemically and so expansively, and that's so important to this work. I'm not sure how some of this language is translating. I keep wondering that. But yeah, Imi, thank you.
Thank you.
So now, So we've now got 3 individual talks, and then we're going to have a panel, and then when we have the panel, there'll be an opportunity for a few questions if we can keep to time. So I'm going to say come up like one by one. So like Melissa, I think we have you next. So Melissa she is the director of We Can Make at the Noel West Media Centre. And the quote that you have here is, "We can only build better if we build with communities." And I guess that's what you're going to talk about.
Yep. Yeah, really thrilled to be here. And I'm so, look at this. Very happy with how on brand I am being. Yeah, great. I think there are some slides. Is there a slide? Or is there a film first? What are we going to do? Yeah. There we go. Yeah. So We Can Make is a community land trust, and we're part of an art and tech collective called Noel West Media in Bristol, southwest England. And we've been kind of running a neighbourhood experiment to reimagine how we could do housing differently. And our animating question is, what if the power and resources to create good homes were in the hands of communities? And they're certainly not in the hands of communities at the moment. So for example, Persimmon, one of the big house builders in the UK, posted pre-tax profits of 1.1 billion euros last year. And they're kind of like, they're not, and on each house they build, they make a 83,000 euro profit. That's not build cost, that's pure profit. Incredible. So, they're not making that kind of money through, building good homes or affordable homes. They're making that money by actively lobbying against green legislation and treating homes like financial products. So our challenge is how do we change that? How do we make a different kind of system? And I think there's a little film to explain what we've been doing over the last couple of years and what was come out of that. Cue film.
Buying a house is more unaffordable than ever, and council house waiting lists are the longest they've ever been. Is there another way? Yes! In Noel West Bristol, we've been creating a new community-led way to unlock microsites for people in housing need. In low-density neighbourhoods like ours, there are often spaces hidden in between buildings and in large back gardens where new homes could be added. We call this gentle densification urban acupuncture. We think it's an approach that other communities could adapt and adopt for their own context. So, how does it work? 1. Start with people. A family might be experiencing overcrowding. An elder might want to downsize but stay in their community. It's an opt-in process. It gives local people a choice to use land that is already in their hands to improve their own housing situation and make a difference to their local community. 2. Ensure the community sets the rules. A design code empowers the community to help set the rules for what gets built, ensuring new homes are high quality and add character to the neighbourhood. The result? It's simpler for people to navigate what can be a complicated design and development process. And when it comes to getting planning permission, the answer is more likely to be a yes. 3. Build for community well-being. When a family opts in, we work with the local council to transfer the microsite to our community land trust. Transfer is conditional on the microsite and home staying in community ownership and fixing the rent at living rent, no more than 1/3 of local household average income. Income is reinvested in making more community-led homes and infrastructure, creating more long-term community benefits. 4. Make the homes locally. It can be tricky to build on microsites because space and access are often tight. To get around this, we use a modular construction system made up of small wooden blocks that fit together a bit like Lego. Using wood means the homes are low carbon and better for the planet. The parts are digitally designed, cut, and assembled in our community workshop. Making the homes locally creates jobs and grows new skills, helping to build community wealth. It also means the community has the know-how to maintain, repair, and adapt the homes, helping to meet changing needs over time. Unlocking microsites in this way creates a new way for people and communities to make the homes they need, and in the process, unlocks a new way to help make a thriving neighbourhood. Together, we can make good homes, local jobs, space for nature, social infrastructure, community wealth, and a thriving neighbourhood. Find out more, visit our website, wecanmake.org.
Cool. Do I just click on for the next slide? Should do. There we go. Yeah. And so, yeah, that's kind of how we did it. And then this is the first two homes, one of the first two homes that we've actually built. So we haven't just imagined it, we've actually built as well. So you can see here, Tony and her daughter Amancia, they were living in a spare bedroom of her parents' council house here. And so they had a really big back garden. And so the land transferred to the Community Land Trust, and then worked with Tony to co-design a home. That's Tony in our little factory making the cassettes for the home. And then that's Tony totally bossing the crew on site, which I just love. And then here it is finished. That's Tony getting the keys on the first day that she moved in. Wow. And that's a little photograph of all the people that helped make the homes. So, which is kind of really nice. And I think what's kind of really nice is that, it does show that it is possible to reimagine and rewire that complex kind of housing development kind of system in all its financial, regulatory kind of complexity. That you can create these tangible moments of clarity and a glimpse about how you can do things differently, which is really kind of great. And then I've just got a kind of couple of field notes from that experience, because I think often when you present kind of like a slide deck like this, it all looks really easy and slick. When you're doing neighbourhood experiments to reimagine how you can make citizens different, it ain't easy or slick. It's quite messy and it's hard, it's gloopy, and need to recognise that. The first is a field note about the importance of rootstock and imagination. So people don't expect much from our neighbourhood. We're a poor neighbourhood in a rich city, Northwest, in the top 5 for deprivation. People look at us and think, we're a problem to be fixed or need to be solved or even demolished and started again. But you scratch the surface and there's all sorts of richness and know-how that you need to tap into. US academic Shannon Matten's got a lovely term for this, rootstock. And that is like where you're going to grow this new ideas from. And you've got to make space and time to really embrace that. And like Angie says, make the space, lean into the arts and culture to create those spaces to make that possible. We won't talk about that, you can talk about them later. But we did all sorts of things, artist residencies, a resident chat show, all sorts of things to try and make a sense of like how we can begin to think about things differently. So lean into that, lean into your rootstock, fertilize it. The second kind of field note is around how to really democratize the means of production if you're going to try and do things differently. The little film talked a little bit about how we made the design code, and it was we had a real crew of people going on spire visits, imagining what's possible, what is the Northwest style, not just boxes, but something really characterful. And then the thing I'm really excited about is how do you get those digital design and construction tools into the hands of communities? Construction is the second least digitized sector in the world, just above hunting. So there's a huge opportunity there to kind of shake things up. And unfortunately, at the moment, most people's vision of what digital construction and modern methods of construction look like is giant factories like that, which, already, they just put more power and wealth into the hands of the already powerful and wealthy. So how do we disrupt that? How do we make these tools diverse, distributed, and genuinely in the hands of communities? How can our factories look a little bit more like that instead? So that's what we've been experimenting with, putting these tools here So kind of our crew, we've been trying to build a system-agnostic neighbourhood factory that can make all sorts of kind of recipes for making homes. And building a kind of social infrastructure that can go with that. Because it's not more than homes. It always has to be more than homes. It's about the other spaces you need to build too. And that is me dancing at the disco there. Very good. And then third, it's like thinking about scale differently. And I think it's kind of like that sense that, what have we done? We've made 2 homes. That's tiny compared to the scale of the housing crisis, the scale that's required. And, you just kind of like begin to doubt yourself sometimes. But I think we are always trying to do more than that. And that idea of urban acupuncture is really important. We put those homes precisely where they're needed most. And we put them in a way, inserted them so that they're acting as nodes, kind of leverage points that can trigger other relationships, connections, networks, flows of values between the families, between the neighbours, the streets, and up until that neighbourhood level. So we're about, it's not just building homes, it's about building the social infrastructure, it's about the localized supply chains, it's about retrofitting kind of front gardens so they're not car parks, instead they're biodiverse gardens. It's all of that stuff at the same time. And then it means a neighborhood can hang on to much more of the value of that development rather than kind of a developer sucking up all the profit. And I think the other kind of thing about pressure, the pressure to scale as well. Now we've built 2 homes. Everyone thinks we're going to build a giant factory and do 300 homes a year because apparently that's what good looks like. But that entirely 100% misses the point of what we're trying to do. We're trying to build a distributed kind of system. So what we're trying to do is like these tools and processes that we've done, trying to make them open source as possible. So the land assembly method, the finance model, the legal stuff, make them open source. And so other neighborhoods can adapt them and adopt them for their own use and their own context. And it's not going to be cookie cutter. People are going to find their own way because all this stuff has to be crafted by context. But we think that's a way that you can begin to actually shift at a system level. And the neighborhood connects up to that. There we go.
Come have a seat, yeah. Thanks, Melissa. Hopefully we can all see, is the film on your website as well?
Not yet, actually, you're the first people to see it.
Amazing. So next up, we've got Akil, and Akil is one of the co-founders of the Resolve Collective, and your quote is, "The best cities are the ones that inhabit you."
Okay. Many thanks for that. I'm going to try and keep this quite brief so that we have enough time to talk to one another and that we have questions. So I'll try and race on without speaking too quickly. Before I introduce myself, let's see if the clicker works. Come on. Click. Before I introduce exactly who I am, I want to start with a conversation that I had with a friend of mine who runs a race and culture collective called Skin Deep. She's also a gardener, and she told me that being a gardener isn't about plants. Being a gardener is about taking care of the soil. I don't know anything about gardening whatsoever, but I do know a good analogy when I see one. So I'm going to take this and try and run with this through the presentation. So as I said, my name's Akil Scafe-Smith, and I run a collective called Resolve, which is an interdisciplinary design studio. We work between architecture, art, technology, and engineering in a way to address social issues. Click, no? Okay, in a way to address social issues. And a lot of the work that we do revolves around a design philosophy that we call using the site as a resource. And for us, that means working in ways to appraise not only local materials, but also to appraise and to value local knowledges. And for us, that's a really important part of the story, because coming where we came from, we worked in situations where tacit local knowledge, types of local knowledge that which isn't valued by institutions or academia, was going on entirely undervalued and was going on entirely under the radar. And so what we aimed to do was work in ways that brought that up and valued that. We come from a place called Streatham in South London. Streatham in South London is a place in London which has nothing to do with the Thames or with Big Ben or with buses, with tubes, sorry. Streatham only has mostly to do with other places in South London, Brixton at the top and Croydon at the bottom. And growing up in Streatham, what we were really concerned with was this idea that the city was our neighbourhood. Our city only stretched to the remit of that neighbourhood. And so we thought to ourselves, how as budding practitioners can we grow in a soil like this? How can we grow in a soil such as Streatham? Our very first project was called Rebel Space, and it was a temporary pavilion that we worked to build with local materials that we sourced from within a 1 mile radius of the site in Brixton. We tried to use it as a way of platforming 7 days and 7 nights of events, different artist exhibitions, different workshops. And so programming for us was as important as the physical design of the space. So herein lied one of the starting fixtures of some of our work, trying to work in a way in which we could work intangibly and tangibly, a way of thinking about the site as our resource and bringing together the local knowledges of different people within that program. We continued to work in Brixton over the years, and for the first few years, Brixton was the only place that we worked. We never left South London. This was another project that we had in Brixton Market, which is an important epicenter of Afro-Caribbean culture in London. We were really concerned with this idea of how food is produced and how knowledge is produced in these areas. And we tried to re-see a place that we were hyper familiar with the eyes of a designer. And in doing so, we resaw these banana boxes. These boxes which acted as integral market infrastructure and were absolutely everywhere in the market. They did everything other than hold bananas. They had meat, Gucci trainers, they had glasses, they were for water mitigation, they used as tables and chairs, and we tried to repurpose these banana boxes as an integral infrastructure within the space, an old abandoned market space that we had in the market, which we used for, if this slider will work, which we use to platform a number of different initiatives within this abandoned space in the market. This became a space where within the armatures created by the banana boxes, we hosted a month worth of events, of talks, we propagated some of the careers and the ambitions of other people around us, and we tried to work as a node within a much wider network of people, of ideas, and of aspirations. One of the really important parts of this work, and one of the things that I reflect on really fondly on a work that happened quite some time ago now, was this idea that we created also a space for joy. And when I first used to show some of these slides, I showed tons and tons of party slides, just non-stop parties after parties. And I used to be embarrassed by that, but actually creating spaces for joy in a city which constantly reaffords and repackages that joy as a luxury is actually a really important part of our spatial work. Also creating a space for different artists. And so at this stage in our career, we really didn't think of ourselves as artists. We had never worked in a formal art institution. We had never walked within anywhere formal other than kind of abandoned spaces. And so a lot of our work was around giving space to others. And so this is the work of an amazing practitioner called Shola Olulade, whose work I show a lot. And this was one of the first times that she had exhibited, and she's now gone on to do amazing things. Not that we're responsible for the amazing things that she's done, but to provide space to try and nurture an ecology that we exist around was a really important part of something that we tried to do at the time. We then finally left South London and went north, still within the UK, to Sheffield. And when we were working in Sheffield in the north, we were really interested in how people experience their city through emotions. We were really interested in the work of Kevin Lynch, and saw some of you will notice some of the diagrams or can recognize some of the diagrams, the emotional mapping work that he kind of propagated in the 60s and 70s while he was working as an urban planner in LA. And we wanted to take this idea of mapping emotions and make it performative. We were interested in seeing the city of Sheffield through the eyes of people in Sheffield. And so we created an emotional mapping process by which we were able to understand and see through those eyes the emotional connections which make the physical tenets of a city. We then recreated those things and then explored them through architecture and artist installations within S1 Art Space, which was the first formal gallery that we worked in. We subdivided the space into a number of different programmable subspaces within which we tried to realize this idea of the city as being seen and built through the emotional and mnemonic connections of its inhabitants. This was a really important part of that work because it got us close to another place that wasn't South London. It got us close to this idea, not that we are just local workers, as Cassie has said, but that we are also working locally. And that means working in other people's locales as well. And to some extent also becoming part of that locale. That's my brother Seth, who also works with me in Resolve, and some of our friends in Sheffield. And so since then, our work has changed scales dramatically. It's gone to a number of different places, but also stayed very similar. We work within the public realm in a number of different places within London, within the UK, and also within Europe. We work to create spaces for other artists and other creatives within formal and informal spaces. We work in strategy with local government, with national government as well, and work on strategic ways to improve and to re-understand the power of community in local spaces. We also work within formal art institutions, and so we work in lots of contexts by which we're trying to work with communities, to work with local knowledges in order to co-create spaces and co-create programs. And we also work within public spaces as well. So this was a project, one of the only projects, in fact, probably the only permanent project that we have, which is in Brixton, and a very big bridge in Brixton. And so those are some of the work that we do. So, and as interdisciplinary designers, we span a number of different fields, a number of different disciplines, also digital research as well, in order to realize this idea, this design philosophy, which I resort back to, this idea of the site as a resource. And so that pervades in a number of different ways, and increasingly so, those ways change shape, they change aesthetic, they change the way that they look and feel. And they're also largely digital now as well. We kind of expanded into the building of digital platforms as a way of understanding those things too. But they're always process-led. And being process-led designers is a really important part of how we work, but now also in how we've taken this time to stop and reflect. We are changing. We've come to a point in our lifespan, and now a good 6 years on, where it starts to think, the time has come to think of ourselves, not only as those who are growing within the soils, but also, to some extent, the carers of that soil. We're thinking about ways in which we work both within and from an ecology which birthed us as practitioners from our local spaces and from the variety of local spaces that we intersect. The big questions that we're asking at this moment in time in our stage in our career is how can the role of a designer facilitate intervention from the bottom down? How can we care for the medium, for the soil through which practices can work locally and globally? Rethinking sharing models of funding, sharing models of stewardship of land, and intersecting with a lot of the things that we've heard in these talks so far. These are some of the diagrams with which we're thinking and rethinking our model of delivery in terms of how we work between nurturing ecologies and platforming knowledges. And some of those things I'll hopefully share in more detail during the panel discussion. To end my talk, just about 5 seconds on time, we kind of work within this platform. We work within an ecology. We work within an overlapping means of different practices, and the acknowledgement of that ecology, the acknowledgement of the network within we are inextricable from, I think is key to now thinking about how we design at a local scale everywhere. Many thanks.
It's Akil. So our final speaker, who's just having his headset sorted out.
Translator. I'm just going to get my translator. Okay. Sorry.
So our final speaker is Sergi. I hope I'm saying that correctly. It might be Sergi. My Spanish or my Catalan is terrible. And he is the lab manager at a social innovation lab. And his saying is posing the focus not only on what we do, but also and especially on how we do it.
Okay, first First of all, thank you very much. It's an honor to share the space and the relational space with you and share all our experiences. Però aquesta presentació la faré
I'm going to be speaking in Catalan nonetheless. I've told my colleagues that I would be speaking in Catalan. It's always nice to be able to speak in Catalan in an international event. We're playing at home, and probably it's the best possible field, CCCD. So I'm proud to speak in Catalan, so bear with me. I will try to speak slowly, like Nuria. Well, Nuria didn't speak slowly. Well, I'm the last one, so I'll try to speak slowly but go fast, because we all want to speak, right? This is me. I am the director of Coboi Lab, a public innovation lab in Sant Boi de Llobregat, which is a city in the Barcelona metropolitan area. And you might be thinking, what the hell are you doing here? Because we've heard very cool and grounded experiences at the neighborhood level. So my proposal is to discuss about how to rethink cities, how to rebuild and redesign the cities in which we want to live from a public administration prisma. And I know this is not very sexy nowadays, but thanks to the festival for inviting us, because I believe that some public administrations are always embracing this prisma. And this is me. So, how does this public lab innovation work? I'm gonna get hands-on right away and say the following. First of all, we try and work within our closest environment. And we define environment as the neighborhood, the city, the metropolitan area, the country, the state. So first of all, it's all about defining the context, the playground, and deciding about where we want to operate, right? And this is very important because the rules of the game will define our task, our work. Once the context is defined, we need to come up with a list of issues or challenges. And of course, we experience multifaceted challenges. And in Coboi, we like complex challenges, such as all those problems or issues that can only be tackled considering different parameters. So, multifaceted problems, as I said before, and this is why we need a systemic approach in order to respond to such complex challenges. So once the playground is defined, once we know what challenges we want to overcome, we need to get hands-on and jump into action. Let me pause here for a second. This is a very important point. You can adopt different approaches here. Art, open innovation, entrepreneurship. You can take as many prisms as you like. You can respond to multifaceted problems from different prisms or angles. But we've chosen 3. And of course, this would be a very long story because we've chosen our approaches in a very organic manner and in a very collaborative manner. But let me say that we have chosen 3 approaches. The first one is multi-stakeholder collaboration, shared agendas, and experimentation. And I'm gonna pause here for too long because probably you know it, and if you don't know it, you don't want to know it. So complex problems have an impact on different stakeholders. So we need to make sure that all the affected stakeholders are engaged in the process. This is common sense, but it's not always the case. Let me say it differently. You cannot respond to a complex problem unless all the relevant actors are engaged, unless we take into consideration the views and perspective of all the affected stakeholders. Now, shared agendas. It's very important to articulate a shared agenda in order to act together. When you have a shared agenda, you have a work plan ahead, and you have a shared, let's say, aim, right? Last but not least, experimentation. Sometimes it's difficult to understand what I'm going to say. Let me give you a highlight. Experimentation has to be understood, or we understand experimentation as innovation, and this saves you a lot of public money, of tax pay money. Many people say experimentation costs a lot. We have other priorities. Well, it's been proved by Nesta, our colleagues from Nesta, and there are even reports that experimentation saves you millions of euro or pounds or any currency. So experimentation understood as public resources optimization. It's very important to underline this. So now that we have understood the three approaches we take in the public lab, it's the right moment to define the what, and not the other way around. That's why I started from the beginning, right? What matters is not so much where we operate, even if of course it's very important, but rather the aim. For us, from our approach, the lab is a forum where we channel different approaches and we get hands-on, we operationalize them. And all this is done in a lab. And now you're going to ask me, so what is a lab? Because I know many of you know a great deal about labs and are very acquainted with the idea of labs. So perhaps it's not the right time, but let me tell you that there are many different types of labs. There are design labs. On the other hand, there are labs like ours, which are public innovation labs. Then there's a European network of living labs. There are labs dealing with future matters, policy labs, etc. To cut a long story short, what matters here is that labs are tools, and this is very important because sometimes labs, which are very fashionable today and very sexy today, one of the main classic mistakes we make is that labs are understood as an end. Like, we need to create a lab. We don't know why, because it's just fashionable or trendy. No, you need to know why you want to set up a lab and what will be its added value. So you need to ask yourself, so what is a lab? Is a lab a real need, or is it something that we only believe in when we are inside, or is it just a pattern? Let me give you a fact. There is a clear labification at all levels, at the public level and at the government level. There's been an exponential labification of public resources. And what does labification mean? It means that labs are being embraced, and the principles on which labs are built are embraced. Trial and error, measurement, etc. And all this implemented into or in the social field. So labs are a fact, and labification is a fact. Labs need to be understood not only as a forum. Labs can take different forms. They do not need to be physical. Labs can be a pop-up lab, programs, methodologies, platforms, tools, institutions. All these long list of words can illustrate a lab. So calm down. If you want to act as a lab, you can take different forms, and the optimal form or the best suited one for you will depend on the context. Great. So let me come to the end of my presentation. Experimentation. Experimentation goes hand in hand with the idea of lab, otherwise it would not be a lab. That's quite obvious, but if you do not embrace experimentation as part of your DNA, you are not a lab, you are something different. Let me say it differently. Labs are made to experiment in them. And this helps us tackle complexity. And you might be thinking, of course, the more complex a problem is, the more collective intelligence you will need to solve it. Of course, but still you need to try things. You need to launch pilots. It's not going to happen that you solve a complex problem from one day to the next. You need decision makers, you need stakeholders. In order to respond to complex problems, you need to experiment, and you need to accept error as something natural. This is another debate that will open another day. Now, to conclude, what is the key question that we need to ask ourselves? I believe the key question is, what is the added value that you are contributing? What are you doing differently from others? Because perhaps other public departments or public administrations are doing things rightly. We're not here to tell other people how to do things. No, we're here to contribute humbly. And what is our added value? Well, we don't know. We're working on it. But in our case, in Coboi Lab, we are quite clear about what our added value. We embrace two concepts that might look contradictory. contradictory. Creativity and methodology. This is our added value. We have embraced this contradiction. We believe there's no such thing as creativity with no robustness, with systematization, without order. So let me give you an example about what I'm saying. Here's a methodology that we have developed based and, of course, influenced by the best methodologies on the world, the method called 417. If you're interested, there will be a presentation about the 417 method at 5:30 in the Raval room. So this is an example of how we apply creativity and put it at work and develop a new product. So, the last idea I would like to share with you is we believe creativity and innovation, well, applied creativity, that is, applied creativity is not creative unless it has a transformative aim, and the same applies to labs. Creativity, or labs rather, are not an end per se. Labs are there to transform things, otherwise they are pointless. Let me conclude for the third time with 3 ideas. From our perspective, dealing with current issues require of an experimental approach. Secondly, you need relational spaces. Those are crucial. You need a new way to take decisions, new governance approaches. This is more timely and needed than ever. Last but not least, and this is personal, that how matters in order to make sure you contribute to a transformation to the system. Thank you.
Thank you. You're going to come and take a seat. So we've got 6 minutes. We're already going into the break, so we were told to finish at 10 past. So I'm going to land 2 questions to think about, as we close. And then I'm going to ask the audience if there's 2 questions. So this is just for you each to think what unifies your work and approach? How would you describe what unifies what you're doing?
Yeah.
And what do you need, or what would you like people listening to take away from this? So whilst you're thinking about that, because that's kind of maybe the closing comments, I'm going to maybe look for just 2 questions, because we are going to still do 10 minutes. Okay, so let's have 3 questions, and let's take them all at once, and then, but maybe only one person respond to each one, because that's all we've got time for. I'd love a question first from a woman in the audience, maybe. There's a couple up there.
Thank you. So inspiring. Thank you all so much. I'm interested if any of you have perspectives on, I'm a renter in London, and I guess lots of young people, I'm moving. I'm moving around a lot, so I'm not staying in one place for a very long time. And many of the people that I house share with and live in communities with are in the same situation. And I find it difficult to community build because we're all on the move so much. And yeah, I just wondered if you had any perspectives on that. I look to where my parents live, and they all know their neighbours are there for a long time. There's a lot of community building. I just wonder how we can capture that or replicate that, as, unfortunately, a lot of us are on the move a lot. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to work out who's going to take that one? And if we've got 2 more questions. There's a lady down here.
Hi, I found this really interesting hearing all of the work that you all do. My question was more on how overwhelming it can feel to get involved in so many different initiatives, and there's so much happening on local levels. So my question really was, and I love the fact that you guys are also working with government as well. I mainly wanted to ask what advice you would give to someone on a local level that wants to get involved, feels quite overwhelmed, probably wants to solve a lot of their personal issues, for instance, but doesn't quite know where to start, and often going down the route of, I'm based in London as well, but writing to your local MP or whatever might be quite long. And actually, even if you do it's a very lengthy process and it's a lot of commitment. So really just thinking about how can people locally get involved in these initiatives, support people that are doing this big work to essentially grow these local initiatives.
Thank you. And a final question? Great.
Yeah, I just wondered if you could share effective examples of how you've worked with social housing providers.
I think that's going to be your one, Melissa. So should we start with the first question, which I think was a lot about, like, if you're in more transient living arrangements and stuff, how do you kind of root yourself and create change?
I've agreed with Imi that I'll answer this one. I hope I do it justice to the question, which I think is a really great one. I think that the problem, especially in a city like London, which we kind of acknowledge the housing crisis that we're in, and we're also kind of within a number of overlapping crises. I think that there can be an affront to the reality of the situation, which is that we have to be transient and move because of those situations if we're unable to buy, which most of us are. Even if we're from London, that becomes very difficult. I'm from, like I said, in South London, and it can be very difficult to stay where it is that you're from, near and impossible to do those things. And so you're confronted with a situation where you have to keep moving around. But one of those things, I think, whenever we're faced with an adversity like that, is to turn that situation, I think, into a strength, in that your experience of that type of ephemerality is also something which binds you to lots of other people in ways that others don't. There are many people who will stand from the pulpit and tell you about how you can be within community, but there's something else that draws them to that community. There's another privilege that they aren't talking about, or there's another privilege that isn't being revealed, that they aren't being quite honest enough around in terms of how that they're allowed to be in that situation. What are the kind of affordabilities that allow them to be in that situation? And I think being in the renters market and being kind of consistently pushed on is actually something which binds you towards those things. There are things like the London Renting Union, which you also already know, I'm sure, that bring together different people within those scenarios to attach them to a kind of trans-local community. And I think when we're addressing a trans-local problem, which is the housing crisis, which is the crisis of landlordism in the city as well, it's really important to think trans-locally. So in some ways, that's a cop-out. It's kind of saying there are ways in which we can become attached to communities which being a renter don't allow us to be, right? In lieu of being able to do that, what are the affordabilities? What are the types of allyship that we can build translocally? And I think organizations like that, and I think kind of by attaching ourselves to organizations that work throughout the city, I think that's a really important first step. That's what I would say, I think.
Great answer. So the second question was, it can be overwhelming. There's so many things to get involved in, and where to start.
So first of all, I just wanted to say, like, I really, really fundamentally believe in being a great follower. So I am actually, like, a lot of people will often say, like, how did you do all of this, and what keeps you going? I'm actually just I just really love following visionary people. So I'm part of a studio called 00. And of course, I'm sat alongside a lot of really visionary peeps. And why I wanted to say that is that the overwhelm can come also from feeling like there's so much that you have to do. And the things that I have had to build myself is out of necessity rather than out of a space of being like, I really want to run an organization. So I think that when you talked about the many different things that were coming up for you around personal challenges, about there's so much to get involved in, I do think it's really important to go back to some of the baseline first principles that Angie talked about understanding where you are within that. And we start with a principle when people say, well, what's the neighbourhood? Because it's not the voting boundary, it's not the postcode. And we always start with this idea of starting where you are. So if there are challenges and inner work and things that you want to work on yourself, where is the spaces that can heal and grow in you? Who are the people that you feel really attached to be like, I would love to see this happen in the world, and to align yourself with where your spirit takes you and where you feel safe and where you feel like you can heal and also feel inspired to move. and to be able to work, not to worry about necessarily, like Melissa also said, like the scale of different things. Because when you go into something like housing, you're suddenly like, well, hold on, planning needs to change, and that can also just completely overwhelm. So starting from an early point of where spirit takes you, and then what I would say is over time that healing, that inspiration, that connectivity will bring you the right kind of ecology to see yourself in. And just to finish, I don't think I would say over the years now, as I've gone through this a lot, I feel like I've gone in a space where I experimented with loads and I threw myself into loads of different things. But certainly now I can see a lot in my generation and the generation just above me. We're really starting to like try and focus on building like demonstrators of that future in a certain place, which does require some discipline of just saying, okay, we need to let go of some things. But early on, I would say go where your spirit takes you, go where it heals you, where it inspires you, and whose visions alongside your own you feel really aligned to, because that's how I kind of found myself in this beautiful network of people.
Great. And Melissa, do you want to take the last question?
Yeah, social housing. And just to follow up on that last one, I've got this little exercise which I'm a bit cheesy about called highest point of contribution. So if you want it, I'll give it to you afterwards. And it's just quite nice. It's like a good thing to go back to. Social housing and collaboration is kind of like a general point. I think about any collaboration you're doing, and Sergi, you might add to this as well about how you do that multi-stakeholder engagement. And it's kind of, social housing providers and collaborators come in all shapes and sizes. Some are very big and commercial, and some are small and diverse and maybe a little bit more flexible. But, both kinds are actually very potentially useful collaborators. And it's always going to be about what the terms of the engagement are. What's the offer? What's the ask? What's talking about that stuff at the beginning before you fall out is always better as well. And think about, social housing providers, what do they got? They've got better access to borrowing on better terms than you have probably. And they've got deep technical knowledge, particularly in, dark matters of regulation. Brilliant. They've got that stuff. Maybe you're bringing something else, which is about creativity and hyper-local kind of knowledge. Mixing that up is always got to be kind of important. But I think that goes for any kind of, collaboration that you're doing. Thinking about the terms of it is really, really important.
Thank you. I think I'm going to start with you. Just this final, we've got like 20 seconds. Maybe like what's the one thing you would want to land with everyone that's listening about why this work is important in what you're all doing at this moment in time?
Mic, please. Mic, please. We can't hear. In the translation booth, we can't hear.
No dic ja està, que ja ho has dit.
Està parlant anglès? No se sent.
Exacte. Està parlant.
You have a huge problem. And sometimes I feel that we have this kind of problems, We find that the people don't agree with the same rules and the same expectations. And then when you start with the same vision, the same rules, and defining your playground, everything is much more easier and the possibility of the successful is what I add.
Okay, thank you. Akil,
Could you repeat the question?
what's like one thing you want everyone to hear in terms of what you're all doing and why it's important now?
I think, to be very short and concise, one of the things that we all do working locally is, I think, a critique on scale. Melissa kind of commented on it very well, in this idea that we're always expected to scale up. And actually, I think that's a poor understanding of maths. In fact, we can scale inwards, and there's an infinite number of quantities between the numbers 1 and 2. Actually, we don't really need to think about how we do things on a huge scale, but rather how we do things very well on a network scale, and how that grows and kind of propagates as well. So how we kind of critique and think about scale, I think that we all are trying to go towards. And if we can leave by thinking that scaling up is not the only way of scaling, that would be the thing that I say.
100% scale. That is absolutely on. I'm going to take away a new word, labification. Hooray, love it. And then into that labification, like this is abundance. Like all of this richness is the abundance to take into both those discussions about scale and labification. So like, you know, we are a movement, we are a network, we're only going to do this together. So yeah, talk.
Thank you. Yeah, really agree with what's been shared before. I think what unifies us is that we're trying to demonstrate tomorrow today, even if that is at a small scale. Like we have one foot in the incumbent system. We're not just total dreamers who are like, everything can be different and we're going to keep talking and writing about it till the end of our days, although that is very important. We've also got one foot in the future system. At whatever scale of convening, organising, we are trying to build that future in practice, and we are quite relentless. A lot of us haven't gone off track for nearly a decade now. We haven't moved into lots of different spaces. We've just carried on building the next step as we learn a new system knot, we start to massage it out. And so I think there is something about the persistence, and I think we're all proximate. So I think we're people who are proximate to the places that we're working in. And I think that those ingredients mean that you can touch, see and feel tangibly and in some of the intangibles of these futures we talk about in practice today. And I think that is going to be really crucial for us all to believe and to take away that we do have more power than we think we have. But we need to stay really proximate, persistent and to really demonstrate tomorrow today.
Thanks, Amy. So thank you to the panel and also to Angie, who's somewhere in the world.